Hey everybody, this is Darren Van Dam, and you are watching Flick Connection, the show that helps you get more out of movies, and today I'm going to tell you about my absolute favorite movies to recommend across all the major streaming platforms. So longtime subscribers know this channel is really well known for recommending movies you likely have not heard of. In this video, I'm going to be talking about my absolute favorite 20 currently available on streaming, and we're going to be talking about 4 movies on Prime Video, Netflix, HBO Max, Hulu, and then 1 each on premium services like Shudder, Showtime, Cinemax, and Starz. And with 20 really great movies, not just pretty good to recommend, 20 fantastic movies, a lot of them you probably haven't heard of, you're sure to come away from this video with your queue stacked with really great stuff to watch over the next couple of weeks. That said, let's go ahead and start with my Prime Video recommendations, with one from director Steven Soderbergh, who is a top-tier director. Ocean's 11, Traffic, his newest movie No Sudden Move hits HBO Max and theaters in just a couple of weeks, but The Limey is one of his more underrated movies. Now this was an early work of his, and in this movie a hitman is out for revenge, yet it's edited in a way that's a little bit chopped up, so the story can be a little confusing, and it's a cool, slick flick. Terrence Stamp gives an incredible performance, one of the best I've ever seen him give. And incidentally, this is from the writer of Dark City, a cult classic. While The Limey doesn't have much at all in common with Dark City, it does have kind of a hard edge. It's not going to be too intense for most folks, but it's certainly going to be intense enough for people who are fans of this channel. Now, if you want something really intense, Split Second is a Rutger Hauer sci-fi murder mystery type thing that takes place in a future where London is sort of flooded. They make kind of a big deal of it, but essentially you got guys driving around in Jeeps, water spraying up everywhere. That's a minor detail to this movie, but what's really going on is this murder investigation that appears to have ties to some sort of satanistic rituals, yet there seems to be something even more sinister behind that. You get Rutger Hauer being a total badass in this movie, huge guns, I'm talking huge guns, and a really bizarre, twisted concept. Now this does feel very dated, but in a good way, one of the best ways possible. You're talking practical effects and makeup, again, huge guns, sort of a synth soundtrack, and just a good vintage look to it, and Rutger Hauer being at his second most badass he's ever been, second to Blade Runner. I'm sorry, third most badass. Blade Runner, The Hitcher, then Split Second. I also highly recommend The Fisher King. This one is fairly well known, but I have a hunch a lot of people watching have not even heard of it. This is directed by Terry Gilliam, who did some of the better Monty Python movies. He's probably most known for Brazil, and in this movie Jeff Bridges befriends a homeless man played by Robin Williams, who has sort of this grand fantasy inside of his head, and then Terry Gilliam does a great job of sort of interlacing reality with that fantasy, making for some beautiful visuals, and easily one of Robin Williams' best performances of all time. And finally on Prime, I recommend Let the Right One In. This is foreign language. It's originally from Sweden, I believe. This movie is also available on Hulu, but I'm not going to include it in my Hulu recommendations. To me, this is one of the most feasible depictions of vampires in a movie. You get a young boy who befriends a neighborhood girl who definitely is a vampire, and it's very touching at times. It's not this grand sort of fun adventure or anything like that. This is kind of a downer of a movie, but it does also have a sweet spot at its center. Very, very good stuff. There is an American remake called Let Me In that is quite good as far as American remakes go, but the original is absolutely fantastic. If you like this genre and you've never tried watching this movie, I cannot recommend it enough. Now we're on to HBO Max, where I'm not including my absolute favorite one, Confessions of a Dangerous Mind. It was just on my last HBO list. I'll put a link to that in the description in the top comment, along with the full list of all the movies that I'm talking about in this video. It's always in that top pinned comment. Scroll down, do a screen grab with your phone, then you've got the full list. But my first pick for HBO Max right now is Point Blank. This is a slick crime movie from 1967. They would later remake it into a movie called Payback with Mel Gibson that is also quite good as far as remakes go. And if you don't generally watch movies that are that old, This is a cool flick if you like movies like Drive with Ryan Gosling. Those movies are inspired by ones like this. There's a trippy psychedelic element to this one. The editing is a little bit chopped up. It's got a really cool vibe for the era, because it definitely looks like it's from the 60s, but it's also got this slick nature to it that was pretty cutting edge for the time, and just a great revenge story at its core. One of my favorites. I watch it all the time. If you've never seen it and you generally like my recommendations, you're gonna love this one. Now, the Coen brothers don't have many hidden gems in their filmography, but their first movie ever is still highly underappreciated in terms of the public at large. It's called Blood Simple, and this is not a comedy like you normally get from them. It is a stone cold thriller. This one really goes hand in hand with Fargo and No Country for Old Men. In fact, I consider the three of these to be a trilogy of theirs. So if you love those other two, you need to watch Blood Simple. The story with this one is, as their first movie, they went out, they raised about $1 million to get this thing made, and it is expertly done. For filmmakers doing their first feature film, the tension, everything is just incredible in this movie. I cannot recommend it enough for anyone that loves Fargo and No Country for Old Men. One of the most f***ed up French language movies of all time, and that is saying something, is Man Bites Dog. Now, this is black and white, and you are going to have to read subtitles, but if you like really wild, dark stuff, it's hard to go wrong with this one, because this is a fake documentary about some people following a murderer around, and then things get even stickier when the camera crew begins to intervene in different ways. It's really clever stuff. It's incredibly dark, but also funny. This is a dark comedy, but this is not for the faint of heart. While it's not gore and disgusting and really gonna repulse you, the concept and some of the things that this guy does to people is pretty awful, yet if you like dark comedies, this one is an absolute gem. Speaking of dark comedies, Black Dynamite, I think, is one of the most underrated comedies of all time. Not most underrated, blaxploitation, spoof comedies, most underrated comedies of all time. It is absolutely hilarious. Every few seconds there is a fantastic joke. This is also a great movie for movie lovers. There's a ton of little production jokes, boom mics, people looking at the camera, things like that, all done on purpose. And again, incredible comedic performances. And one of the things I love about Black Dynamite isn't just the retro 70s vibe, it's the fact that this movie goes full ham the further you get into it. A lot of times comedies will sort of peak and then taper off, and you often can't even remember how they end. The last couple of sequences are so bonkers, they make the movie. They're the reason I'm so enthusiastic about it. If you like silly, and I mean ridiculously silly comedies, it's hard to go wrong with Black Dynamite. Alright, my first two recommendations on Hulu are both from South Korea. They're two of my absolute favorite movies to recommend from South Korea, and they're not nearly as well known as they should be. The first being The Good, the Bad, the Weird. This one is a Western, and not just kind of a Western, a big, sweeping, action-packed Western. I'm talking Indiana Jones level action in this movie. You are gonna have to read subtitles, but if that's something you do, this is a bonkers wild ride with incredible visuals, and it's just fun. It's got great music, incredible action, the Western vibe looks great. I cannot think of an American-made Western action movie that's anywhere near as good as this one. If you've never seen it and you like that type of stuff, again, you will be reading subtitles, but it is well worth the effort because this movie is so much fun. And because these are my favorite 20 hidden gems to recommend, I gotta recommend Train to Busan. I used to recommend this on the channel all the time. In fact, I have an entire video that talks about how much better Train to Busan is than World War Z, because there is a lot in common. If you like World War Z, I think you could really enjoy Train to Busan. There's some heart there, there's some great action sequences, and it's just a thrilling ride. This is a movie that I have shown to family and friends over the years. I've yet to meet anyone I've showed this to that not just didn't like it, that didn't love it, that didn't just talk about it the next time I saw them. That's how much people love this movie. If you've yet to discover it, check it out. It jumps around on streaming services, but right now you can catch it on Hulu. One of the weirdest movies I saw during the pandemic was Possessor. This is actually directed by the son of David Cronenberg, who's known to have directed some of the weirdest, wildest, kind of grossest movies ever made. And while Possessor doesn't really fall into that category, it's pretty close. There is some horrific violence in this movie, and you feel it. You feel the punches and the kicks and the stabs, but mostly what you're getting is this really twisted sci-fi, sort of an espionage thing that's really, really subtle at times. And this is a fairly low-budget movie. It's not gonna dazzle you with big special effects or anything, but I think the look of it's great. The story is really twisted. If you like Black Mirror, this is as if David Cronenberg directed a Black Mirror episode and it runs 90 minutes. It's dark, twisted stuff. If you like that, definitely check out Possessor. If you do not, I would warn you to stay clear of this one. And then my last pick on Hulu is Bound. I love recommending this movie to the right crowd. This is the first movie that the Wachowskis did before The Matrix. In fact, this was part of their deal in order to be able to direct The Matrix. Warner Brothers wanted to know if they could actually direct a movie, so they gave them $1 million to do this sort of a gangster thriller type thing starring Gina Gershon and Jennifer Tilly. Yes, they have a sex scene together in the movie. Yes, it's pretty quick, but yes, it is pretty hot. But also, you get this great crime thing with this blood-soaked money and this really twisted, complicated caper type of a thing that is, again, expertly directed for a first time out of the gate on a feature film. They killed it. It's no wonder Warner Brothers let them direct The Matrix. This is a great little gem that far too few people know about. Now we're on to my Netflix picks, and then we'll be on to those other premium services. But right now on Netflix, they just brought back one of my favorite hidden gems, Small Town Crime. Now do not confuse this with Small Crimes. They are different movies, and that's why they have different titles. John Hawkes plays a private detective who definitely has a drinking problem, but as simple as the setup for this looks, and really as low budget as the movie is, and it's clearly low budget, not in a bad way, but again, not big special effects or anything, for just a cool little crime sort of murder mystery thing, this one punches way above its weight. It's fun, John Hawkes is great, and you get really great supporting roles from people like Robert Forster and Clifton Collins Jr. Pretty fantastic stuff in my opinion. If you like my recommendations generally, or you just like crime movies, this is a top-notch recommendation that I know the vast majority of people watching this video haven't seen yet. And then when some of you knew what type of video this was going to be, you had to call it. I'm gonna put The Guest on my Netflix list. I love recommending this movie. It's got a killer retro wave soundtrack. Dan Stevens is an absolute badass in it. Make Him Enroll kind of steals the show though. It really is her movie, or at least it becomes her movie. And there's this really, again, an interesting mystery. I can't tell you too much about what makes this movie cool, other than the fact that you do need to be patient. This movie does take a while getting in, but if you buy into it early on, it only gets better all the way up to the final shots. And my audience has agreed with me many times on this movie. I haven't mentioned it in a while because I mentioned it too many times in the past, but these are my favorite movies on streaming, so I had to include it. My next pick is Avengement, one of my favorite things to have found in the last year or so. In fact, you guys, my audience, let me know about this movie in the comments, and I've watched it multiple times. I've watched it with my dad, my friends have watched it, they all love it. This stars Scott Adkins, and if you're not familiar with him, imagine if Guy Ritchie directed a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie, like a good one. That's what you get with Avengement. And if that doesn't sell you on it, then I don't know, maybe it's not for you. And then speaking of Guy Ritchie, I highly recommend Layer Cake. While he didn't direct it, his producer, Matthew Vaughn, this was his first time in the director's chair, and Matthew Vaughn went on to do incredible movies like X-Men First Class, Stardust, Kick-Ass, The Kingsman, but this is essentially his answer to Guy Ritchie's dark, gritty gangster movies. He created a really polished one starring Daniel Craig, and there is no doubt that this movie is the reason Daniel Craig became James Bond just a few years later. If you like him, you'll love this movie. If you like Sienna Miller, you'll love this movie. If you like Guy Ritchie movies, you'll love this movie. So that's Netflix. Those are all the big streaming services. Hopefully you have a bunch to choose from there, but if you don't, let's talk about some other platforms, starting with Shudder, one I know a lot of you don't necessarily have, but I do recommend it. For a few bucks a month, you get access to a huge library of horror and thriller movies. It is a lot of B-level stuff. If you're into that, it's great for that, but there are some really cool things on there as well. Zombie is one of my favorite vintage zombie movies of all time, and it's not widely known. Now, I love George A. Romero's movies as much as anybody, but Zombie really takes things to another level. It looks a little basic, but you get some amazing sequences in this one, including a zombie fighting a shark, including there's one with a splintered door. I can't say what happens, but it is wild stuff. Fantastic, gory practical effects that are just really great to watch. Hordes of zombies, slow-moving ones, but still great, classic, vintage stuff. If you love zombie movies and you never caught this one, it's required viewing if you consider yourself to be any kind of movie buff, especially in that genre. One of the more surprising movies to have been released during the pandemic that got no real notice was The Kid Detective. You can currently catch it on Starz. And here we have another first-time director absolutely killing it. In this movie, Adam Brody plays a small-town detective again, but here, he was a detective when he was a kid, a lot of people liked him, and he has essentially just never really grown up. He still lives at home. So it's kind of funny. It's kind of a dark comedy. It's not gonna make you laugh out loud all the way through, but it is funny. Adam Brody is fantastic in it, and it's got a great mystery at its core. While some people are not gonna be pleased with the ending, if you generally don't get upset by endings of movies, then there's a good chance you're really gonna like what happens at the end of this movie. I sure as hell did, but fair warning, it's not for everybody. Before the Devil Knows You're Dead is a fantastic movie on Cinemax right now. It's one of Philip Seymour Hoffman's final movies. He does play a heroin user in the movie, which is a little bit on the nose, but he and his brother, played by Ethan Hawke, decide to knock off a jewelry store. What is great and really makes this work though is they are not robbers at all. They just are desperate guys, they need money, things obviously don't go well. Marissa Tomei has a small role, but she's fantastic. This is a good sort of crime caper, but it's borderline art film. It's got a very slow pace to it. If you generally don't like things like that, this one may feel a little slow to you, but it's all very intentional and it's very, very well done. But for people with impatient personalities, this may not be the best pick off this list for you. And then finally on Tubi, my favorite free app to use. If you've never used it, odds are it's available on whatever device you use to stream movies, and it is completely free. You don't even have to have an account. The only reason to make one is so that you can make a watch list. But Wind River is a broadly appealing movie, and it's actually written and directed by the writer of Sicario and Hell or High Water, two movies I really enjoyed. In this movie, Jeremy Renner, again, plays kind of a detective type character who's investigating a murder. I didn't mean to have so many of those on this list, but they're all so good. This one, I do have to say, does depict sexual assault in a pretty brutal fashion. It serves the story, it's necessary in the movie, but I didn't want anybody getting too blindsided by that. So this one can be upsetting, but everything else is really well done. Great performances, great locations, great story, well directed, fantastic stuff. Hopefully you found a good handful of good movies to watch off of this list, more than usual on this channel. If you're new here and you're still watching, go ahead and click the subscribe button and the little bell icon. That way you get notified when I put out new videos like this one. Help me thank the Patreon supporters down in the comments below. If you are interested in becoming a Patreon supporter and supporting the channel, there's a link in the video description. There's also a link where you can join the channel, or you can just click that little join button below this video and get access to exclusive videos so that you never run out of good movies to watch. But I will keep making videos like this one as long as you keep watching them. Thanks for checking out this episode, and you will see me on the next one.